James Watt's contribution was to greatly improve the efficiency of the Newcomen engine. The mid-1800s was the time of steamboats on the Mississippi River system. To provide fuel, trees were gradually being cut farther and farther from riverbanks. Forests were being depleted to provide fuel, and trees were cut down faster than new ones could grow. The switch to coal, or stored solar energy, began in about 1850, followed by natural gas and oil. The use of what we call today renewable energy declined from 100% to its present level of 7 to 8%, and today is mostly provided by hydropower. The decline occurred for good technical reasons. Renewable energies simply could not supply enough reliable energy. The switch to fossil fuels was beneficial for the environment because it allowed forests in the United States to recover, and today there is more forest than in the late 1800s. It is also interesting to note that slavery ended soon after the switch to fossil fuels. Are you drawing a parallel between increased energy use and the end of slavery?
In a sense, yes. Although there is no question about a moral component. Slavery is recognized to be a fundamentally economic phenomenon used to benefit those in power. The ancient Egyptians enslaved 20,000 people in order to build the pyramids. Agriculture required tremendous numbers of slaves throughout history. Why would you need an indentured Victorian scullery maid to wash your dishes when you can just turn on a dishwasher? Why house, feed, administer, and intimidate 20,000 slaves in the middle of the desert when diesel-powered machinery and an engineering team can build a bigger and better pyramid much faster? It can also be argued that increased energy consumption has led to the de-stratification of society. Class structures in society are far less pronounced than they were in the past, thanks to increased energy use.
What do you want viewers to take away from this section?
What is important is to recognize that we used to power the whole world with biomass, such as firewood. However, there was not enough wood to power the world centuries ago, when energy consumption was several times less than today. This is why we switched to coal in the first place, to harness the stored solar energy in the ground. When people talk about the return to biomass, such as producing ethanol from corn and methanol from wood, they do not seem to be aware that this strategy did not work 150 years ago. They appear to underestimate the scale of world energy use.
Could you explain?
Many ways of generating electricity are possible on a small way in a laboratory. But when we evaluate these methods against the quantity of electricity the world uses, most are not practical, often for several reasons. That is why about 1/3 of the world's electricity is generated by burning coal, another third by hydro and nuclear together, and the remaining third by natural gas and oil. Understanding the scale can make a huge difference when assessing the possible contribution of any energy source. For example, renewable energy supply about 9% of world energy today, or about 40 exajoules. This is a small part of the target to replace most of the 388 exajoules of fossil fuels consumed in 2005. And percentage-wise, it's not likely to increase for good technical reasons.
Electricity generation consumes about 2/5 of all world energy and uses all forms of primary energy. Fossil fuels account for about 60% of electricity generation. Coal alone accounts for about 1/3. All of the renewable energies are included in hydro. They are small and produce electricity. The importance of electricity cannot be overemphasized in today's world. It powers our communication, control, and lighting systems, and the machinery and equipment in our factories and offices. There are no substitutes for electricity. Transportation consumes approximately 1/5 of world energy. It is supplied 95% by oil, simply because there are no substitutes for oil on the scale required. Liquid fuels are concentrated and easy to handle. Residential, industrial, and commercial account for about 2/5 of world energy demand and consume oil and natural gas, mainly for space heating, plus all of the electricity from electricity generation. This line represents actual world energy consumption from 1970 to 2005. This line represents the business as usual scenario, IS 92A, prepared in 1992 by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. This scenario suggests that world energy consumption would quadruple between 1990 and 2100. Scenarios such as IS 92A are uncertain because no one can predict the future. However, actual consumption very closely matches the IS 92A scenario between 1990 and 2005. 4 times current world energy demand is a tremendous amount of energy. It will become increasingly difficult for fossil fuels to supply this energy as reserves dwindle. This line represents carbon-free energy. To limit the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere to 550 parts per million, twice that of pre-industrial days, carbon-free energy would have to be available in sufficient quantity to follow this line to about 1,200 exajoules in 2100. We will talk more later about carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere. The business as usual scenario line includes a 1% per year decline in energy per unit of output, which results mostly from increased energy efficiency. We will talk more later about energy efficiency. Why is there such a large increase in world energy consumption? In part, it is caused by a predicted increase in world population. However, a more important factor is growth in energy consumption per person, as shown on the following slide. The red dashed line shows a strong positive correlation between annual energy consumption per capita and annual gross domestic product per capita for 166 countries. GDP per capita is related to income per capita and will be used from now on. Energy use creates wealth, freedom, and a better life for people. The people living in the countries shown in the upper right corner use 100 times more energy and have 100 times more income than those who live in the countries shown in the lower left corner. They have much more control over their lives, more freedom of choice, better medical care, more and better food, clothing, and shelter. Most people in the world are trying to move up towards higher income and, therefore, more energy consumption per person. This includes the people who listen to this presentation. Few, if any, are exempt. Most of the world's population live in countries shown in the lower left of the chart and must use more energy to increase income per person and break out of poverty. This is why energy consumption is expected to grow rapidly throughout the century. China and India together represent 1/3 of the world's population. Their people are at the lower end of the red line and are vigorously trying to move higher up the line. These next 11 countries also represent about 1/3 of the world's population. Altogether, these 13 countries represent almost 2/3 of the world's population, and most are at the lower end of the red line. U.S. per capita energy consumption up to about 1900 was just under the equivalent of 4,000 liters of gasoline. This energy came mostly from firewood. By about 1950, U.S. per capita energy consumption had increased to about the equivalent of 8,000 liters of gasoline. Large rural electrification projects during the Great Depression had extended electricity to most Americans. Today, energy consumption per capita is equivalent to almost 12,000 liters of gasoline. The main point is that during the period from 1850 to 1900, the switch to fossil fuels occurred and energy consumption per capita tripled. Adding this information to the previous slide, we get a surprising result. This slide demonstrates that the United States used more energy per capita in 1850 than almost 60% of what the world uses today. The wealth of the United States compared to that of the rest of the world can be attributed, at least in part, to consuming relatively large amounts of energy for more than 150 years. This reinforces the message that people living in underdeveloped countries must have more access to energy and use it effectively in order to develop. This slide demonstrates that energy per capita and carbon emissions per capita have a parallel relationship with respect to income per capita. This is to be expected because the world's fuel supply is 85% fossil fuels. Thus, reducing carbon emissions per person results in a proportional loss of income. A 25% reduction in carbon emissions results in a 25% loss of income. This is true unless fossil fuels can be replaced with carbon-free energy on the scale required. Once again, we see that the problem of scale is a significant issue. Just like for energy consumption, those countries with the lowest carbon emissions per person have the lowest income per person. These figures for energy and carbon emissions are average for the world. A specific country like Canada may have a slightly different carbon per income line because of the percent of fossil fuels is about 10 percentage points lower than that of the world average, mostly because of hydropower. However, the overall trend line is the same.
But isn't income versus energy consumption just a correlation?
No, it is not just a correlation. There is a direct cause and effect relationship between the use of energy and the resulting income. In the beginning, it was people's energy that provided food, clothing, and shelter from the land by hunting, tilling the soil, building shelter, etc. Harnessing animal power increased the amount of land one person could use to raise food, and income moved up the trend line. This has been proven by archaeological evidence that farming provided time for development of civilization, trades, arts, and culture. Using a tractor and gasoline, one person could produce even more wealth, and time became available for leisure, cultural activities, education, health control, and so on. Again, incomes moved farther up the income trend line. It's important to understand that if the tractor were taken away because there was no more gasoline, incomes would slide quickly down the line. The fact that energy consumption per person determines our well-being and gives us freedom and control over our lives cannot be overemphasized. Fossil fuels magnify the work output of people and create more goods and services for their use and benefit.
Your implication is serious, that if there is not enough energy, our income slips.
Yes. Consider carefully the very negative effects of reducing use of fossil fuels without having an alternative energy source available on a scale large enough to replace them. There's the scale concept again. One can never get very far from it.